Welcome to Middrop Medical Lectures. We are continuing on with our lecture series on homeostasis. I am Dr. JK. In this series on homeostasis, as mentioned earlier, we have 3 videos. I hope you've already watched the first one. If not, please do watch it. I request you to watch it. This video is about the feedback mechanisms that play a major role in maintaining or achieving homeostasis. So, what is a feedback system? A feedback system is a cycle of events in which the state of the body is constantly monitored, evaluated, changed, remonitored, reevaluated, and rechanged till normalcy is restored. This is the definition of a feedback system. When we see this with the examples, you will understand much better. Let us look at the basic components of a feedback system. Initially, there is homeostasis. That is, some parameter is at its normal level. Then a disturbance occurs that causes a change in a particular variable. This variable change initiates a feedback mechanism which responds to this variable change by either stimulating or inhibiting that particular variable, so that once again homeostasis is achieved. We'll look at an example. So we have normal blood sugar level as the homeostasis. So once we have food, what happens? The blood glucose level naturally increases. So feedback is activated. So our body secretes insulin as a response. Insulin brings down the blood glucose level. So once again, homeostasis is achieved. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Suppose the disturbance this time is fasting. So what happens now? The blood glucose level decreases. Again, feedback is activated. Other hormones are secreted like glucagon, which increases the blood sugar level to normal. Again, homeostasis is achieved. So either there is an increase or decrease in the variable to achieve homeostasis. This is the basic framework of any feedback system. So what are the feedback mechanisms that are present in our body? The first one is negative feedback mechanism, which is the most utilized feedback mechanism in our body. The next one is called as positive feedback mechanism. And one more is called as feed-forward mechanism. We'll look into each one of these in detail. So what is a negative feedback mechanism? We'll have the framework of a feedback mechanism here, and we'll try to explain what exactly a negative feedback mechanism means. For that, you just have to look at 2 things. The first one is change in the variable. The second one is the response. If the disturbance stimulates the variable and the response is inhibition of the variable, or in other words, if the disturbance inhibits the variable and the response is stimulation of the variable to achieve homeostasis, this is a negative feedback mechanism. Please remember, the response and the variable change will be opposite to each other. When we see it with an example, we'll understand much better. Negative feedback mechanism. As mentioned earlier, the response is opposite to that of the stimulus. BP regulation, blood sugar regulation, which we already saw, and temperature regulation, and many more examples come under negative feedback mechanism. This is the most utilized feedback mechanism in our body. We look into one of the above mentioned examples in detail to see how a negative feedback mechanism works. So there is normal BP, then there is a disturbance in the form of a change in posture. This decreases blood pressure. This is sensed by the BP monitors, for example like baroreceptors, which is taken to the brain, particularly the BP regulating centers, which then respond by activating certain responses which finally increase the BP back to normal. Now the stimulus here was decrease in blood pressure, whereas the response is increase in blood pressure. The response is opposite to that of the stimulus. This is the hallmark for a negative feedback mechanism. The next feedback system you're going to see is called as positive feedback mechanism. The main difference between a negative feedback and positive feedback is, in positive feedback mechanism, the change in the variable and the response occur in the same direction. We'll see an example to understand better. Positive feedback mechanism. The main difference between negative and positive feedback is the response further enhances the original stimulus. That is, they are in the same direction. Parturition reflex at the time of delivery, LH surge during ovulation, clotting factor activation in blood coagulation are examples for positive feedback mechanism, which is the lesser utilized feedback mechanism in our body. Let us look into the detail of positive feedback mechanism. Let's look at parturition reflex. So at the time of delivery, a matured fetus pushes onto the mother's cervix. This stretches the cervix, which we call as cervical distension. This stimulus in turn releases oxytocin from the posterior pituitary, and oxytocin in turn further increases uterine contractions, which will push the baby downward, and again the baby will push onto the cervix, which stretches or dilates the cervix. This cycle continues until the baby is delivered. So the stimulus is stretch of the cervix, and the response is also stretch or dilatation of the cervix. So the stimulus and response are in the same direction. Hence, positive feedback mechanism. Now that we have studied both negative and positive feedback, let me ask you a question. I told you that negative is more commonly utilized in our body and positive is not that commonly utilized. Now you have to tell me why. Why positive feedback mechanism is not commonly used in our body? The answer is a little logical if you think about it. Give me the answers in the comment section. So what are feed-forward mechanisms then? We'll have the framework of a feedback here. You'll see first there occurs a disturbance. That disturbance causes a change in the variable. That variable change activates feedback mechanisms. Then finally the response occurs, then homeostasis is achieved. For a disturbance to activate a feedback mechanism to achieve homeostasis, there is a small time gap. This is what we call as lag of a feedback mechanism. In feed-forward mechanisms, this lag is prevented or this lag is bypassed in such a way that the body anticipates the change that is going to happen and it starts the feedback mechanisms even before the change occurs. Again, when we see an example, you'll understand better. We'll look at some examples for feed-forward mechanism. The first one is the cephalic phase of HCl and salivary secretion. The thought or even sight of the food we like triggers these feed-forward mechanisms, and even before we start eating, HCl and saliva will be secreted to prepare our GI tract for proper digestion. The same thing happens with exercise. Even before we start to exercise, the heart rate and respiratory rate will increase to prepare our body for this excess demand of oxygen. So these mechanisms in which the body anticipates the change that is going to happen and prepares the body, thereby reducing the lag that is present in the other feedback mechanisms. These mechanisms are called as feed-forward mechanisms. This finishes the second part of our lecture series on homeostasis. Just one more to go. Do check it out. Please like and share our videos. Please subscribe to our channel. Your support and encouragement, it means a lot to us. And one more thing, in the description you can get a link to our Instagram page where you can get notes to all our videos. Please note the post number so that you can easily access the notes for that particular video. Thank you again and see you in the next lecture.